This is a video podcast of lifechurch.tv.
Welcome out to week number 3 of our podcast for Mind Your Own Business. If you'll remember, in our week number 1, we talked about our plan, our vision that God has given us for our business. In week number 2, we talked about in our business, our personal finances that God has given us. What is our business plan? And now in week number 3, we're going to be talking about tithing, our giving back to God. Now, if you'll remember, tithing is something that we do as a course all along the way in our business. What it is that God has given us, we're honoring God with that. We're going to talk about questions today, how we can honor God in our business plan and being able to give back to Him first and then let God bless our business. So Craig, thank you for being with us. As every week, we're excited to hear from you. We've got a lot of questions from the web this week about tithing, and interested to hear your responses to some of those.
Yeah, we had, this is a lot of people have a lot of good questions, and this will be really the greatest investment we make, returning back to God. And so this week we are talking about the eternal investment of the tithe and the offering that goes beyond that. And then next week we'll talk about just investing. How do we build wealth over a long period of time? And the heart behind it always is, if you remember from the teaching, is that we don't serve money, Sam, we serve God. And the money serves us. Money serves God's purposes and His vision. And so as we talk about the tithe, I think it's really one thing that's unusual to a lot of people is, if you remember, the tithe belongs to God, and we studied together on the weekend that the Hebrew word is ma'aser, which means a tenth. That belongs to God. So tithing really isn't giving. Tithing is just returning, and it's the beginning point. Really, giving is what we do beyond that. So tithe is really just returning to God what's already His.
I remember when you said that one time in a staff meeting before you taught it on stage, and that was just radical. It's like, I'm not giving, but I'm tithing. But man, it was really true. God really spoke to me in that. And that was, Craig, about 2 years ago that you did that. And Jamie and I have been able to give above and beyond our tithe, and it's been such a blessing to us. And God, we've never once missed what we've given for God.
Well, you guys are so generous. And it's been fun to watch you just over the years grow in your generosity, and then just kind of as an observer see God bless you back in ways that are just massive. Well,
it's awesome stuff, and I'm excited to get to hear some of these questions and get to teach you about how awesome it is to tithe. So let's jump right in with the first question. Is it ever right to take tithe money to pay off debt? My husband tried to start a business but hasn't been successful. Consequently, we have a lot of debt. Is it ever right is there ever a right time to take tithe money to pay off debt? Big question.
We actually had a lot of people ask that, and I think if you take a step back, what you'll see is, a lot of people are hurting, and we have to acknowledge that and say, I hurt for those who hurt financially. But to stop tithing would be to be disobedient to God's word. And as we studied on the weekend in Malachi, that to not return the tithe is to steal from God. And God is the source of all. The tithe, it according to Malachi, it opens up the windows of heaven. It gives God permission to bless us radically. And so a lot of people say, should we ever, we're in big business debt. Well, question is, if you have a house payment, should you stop tithing as well? Where do you draw the line? And should I go out and buy a car and say, okay, well, now I've got debt on this car, so I'm not going to tithe either? So my answer would be, no, you don't stop tithing. You continue tithing. Tithing is the beginning point. It's returning to God what's already His. You don't steal from God. You look for other ways to cut back, and you don't divert God's money to something else. That would be foolish and would really be taking steps back instead of taking steps forward.
That's great. And a story to go along that, one time, Jamie and I were kind of wrestling a little bit with that. We had some medical bills that we were needing to pay off. And in my head, my limited thinking about what God was doing was, well, God's got to give me more money so I can pay this off. Well, we were faithful to go ahead and do the tithe, and all of a sudden we get this letter in the mail, and what had happened, they had made a mistake on their end that, oh man, okay, you guys don't owe this $500. And I'm like, look at that. Yeah. We didn't even end up having to, it wasn't an issue of making more money. God eradicated it right in front of us. This is a pretty cool deal.
Yeah, most people, they'll want to see the result before they tithe, but God asks us to tithe first. He asks us for the faith. And if we see the result, then we don't need the faith. And without faith, it's impossible to please God. So, your story is great, and I bet you I've heard 100 people tell stories like that. I questioned it. I went ahead and I was faithful, and then God blessed us. It takes faith to give first.
And one thing too, it's awesome is being able, as you continually give, you see God's faithfulness in giving, and it's easy to continue to be generous because you know He's faithful in giving, no matter what that is. So
Good question.
Okay, another great question here is, this is a popular question now. Do I tithe from my net or my gross pay?
Good question. What do you think?
Depends on if you want the good old statement, net blessings or gross
That's
blessings.
the old pastor answer, right? Yeah. Do you want net blessings or That's exactly right. And I think that is I think it's a debatable answer. Different people take different views. I've heard people say, well, you only tithe off of the net, what's left over after taxes, because you don't control the rest. And I've heard people teach that. I wouldn't split hairs. I think it's more of a heart issue. Personally, Amy and I, we tithe off of gross, always have and always will. That's a personal conviction of ours. I'd say let people seek God, and where they end up, they end up. Most people I know that are really excited about tithe off the gross. We're not looking for excuses. We're trying to err on the side of generosity. Now, I will say that let's say you have a small business, and we're not talking about your business, your finances, but let's say you're a painter or whatever. At that point, I would say you don't tithe off your gross income into the business, because you have to pay maybe employees, pay workers' comp, pay for equipment. What you would do then is you would pay off of the profit, whatever is left over after you pay the expenses. That's what's profit to you. So that's what you would tithe off of in your business. You don't tithe off, your business may bring in $120,000 a year, but after you pay all your expenses, you may only make $40,000. You tithe off the $40,000, not the $120,000. Now, I know people who do tithe off the $120,000 and do it passionately, but I don't think that's what God requires of us.
Okay, well, man, that's great insight. Okay, another great question. Do I tithe on the money that I get back from my taxes? People wonder that one.
Do you get money back on your taxes?
Very little. Thank goodness.
Well,
actually.
all right, that brings up a whole nother thought, which is if you do get big tax returns, most people think, woohoo, this is good. It's actually not that good, because you know what's happened. If you get a lot of money back on your tax return, you've given the government a tax-free loan all year long. So really, strategically, it's better to maybe pay a little bit or really try to come real close to breaking even. And so getting a big refund is not necessarily really, really good. It feels good, but in the whole year, it's really not that good. So the question would be, do you tithe on money you do get back? And the answer would be, if you've been tithing all year long, then no, you don't need to tithe off of that, because that's money that you've already tithed off of. Especially like we talked about, if you're a gross tither, tithe off the gross, which I hope most people do. So you've tithed off your income all year long. The government gives you some money back. That's money that you've already tithed off of. And the answer would be no. There'd be no need to tithe from that. You may want to give an offering from it. Now, a lot of people weren't tithing all year long, and they get money back on their taxes. Then that could be a great way to kind of catch up, or to give toward the tithe or whatever.
Okay, that's awesome. There's a lot of great organizations out there, Samaritan's Purse, Gospel for Asia, World Outreach, all these different things that are out there. Can people give to those organizations as part of their tithe, as part of that 10%?
Yeah. I personally believe that when Malachi talks about bring the whole tithe into the storehouse, most scholars will say that the storehouse is a picture of the church. And the local church, with all of its strengths and weaknesses, is still God's chosen vessel to reach the world. My personal passion is that the tithe, that it goes to the church, that's where you grow spiritually, that's where you serve, that's where you're being fed, nourished, that's where you're empowered to go do all the rest.